We'll have David from Sila, who's one of our technology partners, who will be demoing us the cyber risk quantification. And then we have Raj from Continue. He's going to be helping us with the continuous control monitoring part of it. I'm Aswin. I'm product manager for cyber products at MetricStream. And if you need any further details after the session, we will be here. You can touch base with us, right? So first, what are the challenges in the way we report cyber risk today, right? So one of the main challenges is, if you see, for any CISO or a cyber risk officer, the communication of cyber risk is one of the key challenges here. When you look at communicating the cyber risk at your organization with the rest of the board members, the CFO, the CEO, the auditor, et cetera, they're all speaking terms of finance, right? So they're talking business. But then when the CISO starts reporting the cyber risk, it's in terms of technology. In this picture, you can see that that's a different language altogether. So we wanted to solve this, make it easier for the cyber risk officers and CISOs to report this, this particular risk in terms of finance, right? The cyber risk in today's world is equal to business risk. It's nothing more or less than that. So in order for the CISO or the CRO to report cyber risk in terms of finance or the business terms, the first challenge is they themselves have to understand the risk in terms of business impact, right? So we'd see how that can be done. FAIR methodology is one of the quantification methods. We've used the Monte Carlo simulation. We've used a statistical model there. There could be multiple others. The example that we are going to look at today, we have taken the NIST framework along with the FAIR methodology and how that can be solved, right? We'll show you some example there. So the data that's collected within MetricStream, that is the building blocks for the cyber risk assessment, is flowing in from multiple feeds, right? So the asset information, that is for your bottom-up kind of approach, the asset information can be pulled in from CMDBs, right? So we have connectors readily available to pull in the information from CMDBs, which are the IT assets, applications, hardware, any of this. That is critical for your business, right, along with various parameters. Then comes the vulnerability scanners. We have scanner connectors readily available as well. You would be able to set up the scans in the vulnerability scanners. It could be Qualys Guard, Nessus, Tenable, any of these, right? So we pull the information from there, and then the threat intelligence feeds, right? This is automated too. So we have connectors available for McAfee threat intelligence feed and a couple of others as well with MITRE, et cetera. And the last one is continuous control monitoring. So this is the control test results that can flow in, right? So the risk assessments will be a derivative of all of these functionality or these parameters coming in from various sources. Now, once the data is collected within MetricStream, that's the first blocks that you see in blue, right? It is from those various different sources that we just discussed about. You can set up and scope the risk assessment from within MetricStream application, right? And then we also have a mechanism where we can collect user input on what are the other variables that needs to be considered for your analysis, right? Once that is done, we pass it on to a statistical engine. In this case, Sila. You could use other engines as well. The statistical engine goes through the complete analysis, runs through this input from MetricStream. That's the data collected. It runs through multiple iterations of the modeling, and then it comes out with the bell curve, which is giving you the confidence of what would be the loss in case of 100% most expected, 10 percentile, et cetera. Once the results are available, we also pull that back into MetricStream again for reporting and analytics, right? You'll see some of the dashboards that are available within MetricStream. And we also have the capability to expose this as views for BI tools like Tableau, right? You could do further slice and dice of the data, reporting, et cetera there. So getting into details of FAIR, the FAIR risk assessment is an factor of frequency and magnitude, right? It's a factor of those two. You could choose to stop at any level in this tree, right, based on the maturity of the risk assessment method that you want to do. So you could choose to just collect the data at frequency and magnitude, or drill deeper, for example, into primary losses and secondary losses, and primary and secondary frequencies, the threats, vulnerabilities, the contact surface, the control strength, et cetera, right? So this can be drilled deeper. You could stop at any of these levels as well. We will see where that kicks in. So this is where we set up the complete risk assessment, decide at what level we want to stop, and then pass it on to the partner, like Sila in this case. I'll request David to take us through a live demo at this point in time, right? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so we have connectors that are readily available in the CAN product, right? We have connectors to CMDBs from where you could pull in the asset information. It could be software applications, hardware, databases, et cetera, that you're tracking, right? This is a bottom-up approach for risk assessment, right? So you could get that information. That's the first one that you see there, the CMDBs. The next one is we have connectors to vulnerabilities. For the assets that you have, you could run vulnerability scans, right? The scanners would give you, these are the severe vulnerabilities in these assets. You'll have to mitigate them and plug them, right? So we have a workflow for that. You could trigger issues into our own ticketing system, or ServiceNow, or BMC Remedy, et cetera. And the residual vulnerabilities are taken in for the risk assessments. We also have connectors with threat intelligence feeds, right? You could decide what are relevant to you. This particularly pulls in all the threats out there, but then somebody has to sit out and then see what is relevant to our organization, right? And then that alone goes into the risk assessments. And finally, the continuous control monitoring. This is the current state of controls in your organization. We capture that as well. And then we already have this loss database, right, from the last year and the previous years. We capture the cyber risk events, the dollar amount associated with it, the frequency in which that they have happened. All of this becomes a feed into the statistical model, along with user input, right, of course. So that's where the first box is. That's the data that is collected. And we have forms for this within MetricStream, the UI. Once that is collected, it's passed on to the statistical engine. OK, so we will look at the demo now. David, sorry. OK. David's from Sila. They're a Technology Alliance partner with us. OK, so do you want to take us through? OK, so what David is showing here is the risk assessment form, right? The risk assessment can be done one in two ways. Either one particular risk, cyber risk, can be impacting multiple assets at your organization, right? That's one way of looking at it. The other way is a single asset at a point in time can have multiple risks, right? It's an N-into-N mapping. One asset, multiple risks, or one risk, multiple assets, right? So we have taken an example of one asset, and then we are going to see what are the different risk scenarios for that, right? So as I said, he's picked up one of the functions, one category of risk there. The primary thing, as I said, in the FAIR methodology is a derivative of loss event frequency and loss event magnitude, right? So he's capturing the loss event frequency here. As you can see, he's captured, OK, whether this particular risk can happen once in a year, or once in 10 years, or once in 15 years, et cetera, right? With the minimum, most likely, and maximum values for each of this. That's the loss event frequency. And then if we can move down, that's you can drill deeper into any level. So for example, if you choose to stay at the first level, that's the loss event frequency itself. You could have done that. Otherwise, you could start drilling deeper, right? There's a checkbox at the end where he's chosen to go down deeper. So you could choose to stay at any of those levels of details or get into more details, right? That's the first parameter that's needed. The second one is the loss magnitude, where we have the primary and the secondary losses. So here also, this is from the FAIR methodology again, these factors that you see here, which is flexible enough, this particular product. You could set up more factors into that. but we have chosen to stick with this for the demo. Per product, per parameter or factor, you could define what could be the loss amount associated to that particular factor, right? So that also can be captured in minimum, most likely, and maximum. And then that becomes your input for your assessment. Then comes the secondary, of course. In this case, I believe he has secondary loss frequency. This is to involve some legal, so that's not the primary loss event, so you could add that part, and then that gets captured as well. And there was a frequency too. Once this is all captured for the risk assessment, you could save this, and then you could submit the whole input that you've captured, along with the threats, vulnerabilities, the loss events from the previous years, all of them, for an analysis or an assessment. Can you submit this?
Sure.
Yep. So at this point in time, the handover takes place. We have passed on all of this information that we collected to the statistical engine, right? So we have given it all the inputs. This is going through all the iterations, right? Multiple iterations that needs to be done with the input that we have collected. So once the iterations are done, this is the dashboard where the output is displayed, right? So this is a simple tabular view where you could start seeing, this is the analysis we just submitted. What are the scenarios that we assessed? You can get deeper into each scenario and see what is the 10th percentile, 90th percentile, or the most likely losses that could happen, and the frequency associated with it, right? So you could start digging deeper into this. And there are a couple of charts and plots that we have as well. We'll look at that quickly. So these are the different assessments that he has done in the past. He's selecting the latest one, and let's say analyze. So you could start seeing these charts that are being plotted, right? So this is against magnitude and frequency. These are the different scenarios that you considered for this assessment. You can see the bubble chart, some of them becoming bigger and with more frequent occurrence, right? And there are multiple other charts as well where you can see the different kinds of losses that will come out of different factors there. Can you also show them the graph? So there you go. So this is the expected loss exceedance, right, based on probability. So if you see here, it starts all the way from 100, where you say, okay, it's 100% possible that you would get this loss, right? So, and then as and when the confidence level keeps going down, you can see what could be the losses that you can incur. It goes all the way to the long tail there. So you could say that at various confidence levels, this is the loss we can expect around this particular risk category or the cyber risk that we have considered. And there are some histograms that comes out as well that tells you what's the frequency and expected loss magnitude here. So this is currently under development. This will be available soon in the product. But then if you want to have hands-on, David is going to be here. You could try this out. Check it out, yeah, you know, he's going to be around. Any questions on this?
How are you confused as to how you're able to generate probability information? Because it looks like it's impact side analysis.
We also have captured the probability, that's the frequency from the users before this, right? That was part of the input screen.
So what I'm trying to get at is likelihood of an event occurring,
Right. Right.
And I'm trying to figure out how you can quantify effectively a prediction on the adversarial source.
So one of the things that becomes input to this is the loss events that have happened in the similar category from the past years, right? Actuarial. Yeah, actuarial data.
Statistically relevant or
yeah, we have both of them. We have loss tables where you can just key it in. saying this is how it could be. The other one is we have a loss event module itself, where we capture every single event is going into the database. We could get a feed of that, and then that could become an input as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to also add that the model takes into account uncertainty. So you have, at some level, people estimating a range, right? And so the model takes into account that range. And the less certain you are, the bigger that range can be. I think the idea is that there's always going to be, the number that comes out at the end isn't going to be an exact number, right? It's going to be an estimation even at the end of the day, and that's just a decision-making tool. And it's certainly, there's uncertainty with the final number, but there's also uncertainty with a yellow, a red, a high, medium, a low. It's a way of getting closer and making better decisions and having a decision-making tool.
Sure. Yeah. That's right. Yes. Yeah, so we call it as the risk assessment roll-up, right? So we could do it by asset classes. That's a cluster of assets or a category of assets. And then you could roll it up by your department, right? So for this department or for this location, we have these many assets. These are the risks for them, and then we could get an aggregated view from there. And you could set it up like, do you want an average or a maximum, that's the worst case, or a best case that you want to see as an aggregation of all of this? That's available as well. Those are separate reports outside this, but that can be done. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely cyber risk is part of the operational risk umbrella, right? So yeah, I understand your question there. So this is only getting you more accurate results. Instead of you reporting it as a high, medium, or low, we are taking this to the next level where we are saying this is the exact dollar amount or a range within which this cyber risk could fall under. So I don't see why there should be a problem because of that. It's only a kind of reporting that is enhanced here, right? So otherwise, the framework where you want to do the reporting where this risk assessment is part of it will still remain. You could use FAIR, you could use other methodologies like IRAM2 or any of the other methods for the risk assessment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. We've not seen that so far, but yeah, that's a valid feedback. We'll try to get more answers to you on that. Yeah. Okay. So this was the FAIR methodology. That brings us to the second part of the presentation. Now we will start looking at what continuous control monitoring is. We saw the risk side of it. This is the control side of it, right? So the CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer, has to worry about this part as well. Some of the challenges that they want to tackle here are, how do I reduce the attack surface, right? So that's a constant ask from the organization. We need to be protected and increase that going forward, right? The other thing is there are increasing IT compliance regulations that have been getting published every year, year on year. We are burdened with them. How do we keep compliance in line with these? And the third one is, how do I prioritize which are the controls to be implemented, what gives me the maximum value, right? These are some of the challenges. Once I have implemented these controls, after doing a cost-benefit analysis, et cetera, the challenge is, how do I ensure that the controls that I have implemented are working efficiently and are accurate, right? So I need to run automated tests periodically, making sure that these controls are working fine. And this place, what we do is we integrate with Continube. That's one of our other technology partners who help us in doing this continuous control monitoring. On an ongoing basis, you monitor these controls and say which ones are working fine, which ones are not. And then a whole workflow is kicked on from then on. And I'd like to bring up Raj from Continube to help us with the details on the magic that happens within Continube. Okay.
Can you guys hear me all right? So, first off, thank you for coming in the morning. I guess you guys did not party yesterday. So my name is Raj Krishnamurthy. I am the co-founder of Continube. We are a bunch of, so what I am here today is to forget that there is a vendor perspective, forget that I belong to sort of a company that we are partnering with MetricStream. I'm here to offer you a system engineer's perspective of what we do in terms of controls automation. I'm very interested in this. I want to make it an interactive dialogue. And my intent is to see if you're in the journey, if you're doing certain things, and if there are ways that we can sort of have a dialogue, share my experience, and sort of make it better for us, right? That's the intent of why I'm here. Actually, I have to see my slides, so if you guys don't mind, I'm going to sort of get down here. 20 some years I have been primarily a software engineer, particularly a systems engineer. We are a bunch of systems engineers that came from very different backgrounds. VMware, can I skip all these?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So VMware, EMC, PayPal, SunGuard, so a bunch of different companies where we had done some very large systems engineering at scale. And we also have a perspective, and we have been on the other side of audit and risk and compliance. And we thought this is a fantastic opportunity for us to sort of come together and work in this space. And that's what Continube does. So if you guys had been at the keynote, and Andy was talking about the continuous controls monitoring, and he asked you to go to the Innovation Hub, and some of you have seen some of you, and we have seen the demo. And I'm here for the rest of the day, and I would be very happy to sort of walk you through the demo, so on and so forth. But for this presentation, I want to take a step back, and I want to talk you through what our perspectives are. I'll be very interested in knowing, what do you think about this. The basic theme is that, by the way, let me ask you this. How many of you guys have been to Gavin's presentation on Monday? There is currency, 1, 2, 3. Did any of you guys attend the session from Peter Kenow yesterday on future audit? It's a completely different perspective, and he has a very interesting title, right? He was the director of data, innovation, and analytics at Wells Fargo, and I strongly recommend that you guys take a look at that as well. By the way, how many of you guys here work in the security office, and how many of you are technical here? Developers, sort of, security engineers? Okay. So I would strongly recommend that if you've been to Gavin, if you have missed Gavin, you should definitely go. I don't know if the videos are available, but you should definitely go take a look at Gavin, maybe talk to David or Gavin. And I think what my presentation is actually an extension of what he said. In fact, whatever I'm going to say, he said it so beautifully and eloquently on Monday. And comparing and contrasting with that is Peter Kenow's speech on audit and how the auditors and the compliance and the risk regime need to move forward, much forward, right? And I'll try and cover some of this, but that's essentially what I'm here to talk about, right? I mean, you're all very familiar with the speed at which your engineering teams are moving, and you can see that very clearly in the marketplace today, right? I mean, for example, Peter touched on this very beautifully the other day, where he talked about Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Blockbuster at one point in time was valued at $4.5 billion. Netflix came from nowhere, and Blockbuster filed for a bankruptcy, and you know where Netflix is today. And all of this happened in a span of 10 years. Now, very similarly, those of you from New York would certainly know this. The medallion used to cost $1 million for a taxi cab in 2014. And today, it is less than maybe $80,000. And primarily because of two companies, right, Uber and Lyft. And the point I'm trying to make is that, and these are business transformations, but if you really look at the thematic of all these companies, right, behind what we are calling as these business transformations is an underlying very strong technological underpinning. And without you take any company for that matter, they have a very, very strong technological underpinning. And most of these organizations that we call digital, and we use a lot of these buzzwords, right? We use these words digital, we use these words AI, we use these words blockchain. And the underlying theme of all these things is the learning of these organizations, right? And which has been there for a long, long time. We always used to learn, every company used to learn. But I think what has become very, very interesting in the last few years is the acceleration at which the learning is happening, right? How fast and how quickly can you learn? And what I want to say is that if you really look at sort of the underlying, sort of the foundation of why this has happened, you can see a tremendous amount of technology shifts, right? I used to work for SunGuard Availability Services, and we used to manage data centers, right? We actually built the first cloud, to be honest, and before there was an AWS cloud. But I don't think, has any of you heard of SunGuard Availability Services as a cloud company? As a cloud company? Okay. So there are these challenges, and a lot of this is about what is happening in terms of the underlying shift, right? And the technology changes, especially as you move from these large bare metal systems into much more nimbler Docker and Kubernetes formats, right? Where it is very, very easy for you to move around. Now, I may sort of be talking, if I'm geeky, I'm sorry, I hope not, but my intent is not to sort of talk about these technological, but the theme is that I think in order for us to be able to have a true business transformation, we will have to look at what it means to be able to technologically transform your organizations, right? And that is the main theme, and I think and MetricStream and Continue particularly is something, and I add myself there. I think MetricStream is leading the pack, and we are a sort of small player that are adding ourselves and trying to contribute and extend that sort of agenda much forward. And we focus on this very specific space called continuous controls monitoring, and our objective is very, very simple. What we want to do, maybe I'll move on to the next slide. What we want to actually do is to be able to say that if you sort of think about sort of the pyramid, and you can see that I'm not your domain subject matter expert because I'm using fundamentally slightly different terminologies here. The way that I see this is that you have a bunch of policies and you have policy makers, right? And I would call them your second line of defense and third line of defense, right? Your audit managers, your risk managers, people who are trying to keep the company safe, people like you, right? Who every day in and day out, they're trying to keep the company safe, trying to keep the people in the company safe, and you're doing a phenomenally great job. And then there are these people who operate, and some of us sort of dual role in that position, but people like your engineering team who are releasing new products, and the cadence is no longer quarterly or monthly, it's actually not even weekly in many cases, it's daily, right? And there are all of these operations and the acceleration of operations that is happening. So you have these people who sort of create these policies, and it gets pushed down to a bunch of people who are operating and using that from an operations perspective on a daily basis. And that's a very critical piece because the risks are not just generated externally they are also internally generated for all the operations that we are doing, and which you guys absolutely know. And on the third side is that sort of a slight variation is that people who are consuming and making decisions, right? I'm sort of putting them into this block bucket and using the chief title, but they need not necessarily be chief risk officers and chief data officers and chief information officers. But the idea here is that how do you sort of bridge these things together? How do you make sure that the data doesn't just flow in one direction, but it is not even, and we are able to sort of collapse all this together so that we can collectively come together to be able to do our jobs, specialized jobs, while at the same time we are able to come together to solve the bigger problems of the enterprise, right? So that is our view. That is the world view. And the way we are trying to do this is to, how do we make it simple for if you have already specified your policies on MetricStream, you have specified your risk controls on MetricStream, how do we make it very easy for you to be able to sort of define these controls and execute these controls, right? And let me give you my perspective of what a control is. I just want to make sure that we are level set. But how do we make it easy for you to be able to execute these controls, and once you execute these controls, consume them on an ongoing basis? Let me give you a very tangible example, because so far I've been making a very abstract set of statements. So let's take a very traditional control, let's say termination control, right? Now, if you take termination as a control, what we say is that Raj Krishnamurthy gets terminated from Continue, right? And your sort of fundamental thesis is that I should not have access to any of the underlying systems. I mean, that is part of NIST, that is part of ISO 20. I mean, this is a sort of a central tenet in terms of any framework that you take, right? Any risk framework that you take, IT, SOX control, so on and so forth. So the question then immediately becomes, what does that mean? So it means that you have a sort of a map of your mission critical applications that I should not have access to. Now, if you sort of break it down further, what does that mean? That means that you have now applications like SAP, and application access to SAP, that I should not. And then if you sort of break it down further, there are databases that support your applications. Should I have database access? Can I be allowed to be a DBA? No, right? And if you sort of take it one level further, there could be hundreds and thousands of machines. It could be a Linux server, it could be a virtual machine, it could be a physical machine, it could be running on containers, it could be running on many different formats that support these systems. So if you look at this, there is a pyramid, and the pyramid gets bigger and bigger. And the question is that what is, and I think David said this so beautifully, right? In many cases, what's happening is that the breach is not so much because somebody found a, sort of a Spectre and a Meltdown and a fantastic, cool-looking Intel sort of pipeline hack on memory. In many cases, it's because a disgruntled employee went out, right, and they published their access. Or in many cases, it is because that people sort of are very smart, and sometimes, they don't normally create their own access. They sort of create a pseudo access and they leave. And how do you protect all these things? And what we are trying to say is that if we are able to sort of bring these policies and make it completely scalable, where we are able to detach the execution context from the policy context, so that we are able to make it easy going back to the termination control. Once you specify a control, we are able to very clearly take the asset information that you've already collected in MetricStream, or maybe other systems, right, that your IT teams would have collected. And we are able to very quickly, as risk managers, you are able to assess the impact of it. This is not to say what your security teams are doing. This is not a replacement to what your security teams are doing. That's not the point here. The point is, as risk managers, as auditors, how do you get sort of the extra assurance that what the reports that you're getting, the feeds that you're getting, that you're able to evaluate on a continuous basis is the point that we're trying to get to, right? So you can execute this, you sort of get a summary of whether it passed or failed, and you can score them, right? You can say, for example, the relative degree of failure that you experience, you can bubble them across these frameworks, and the most important thing is that you can look at this from a trending perspective, right? You can say, for example, this was my score last week or the week before, and I mean, we may disagree on the particular number, it may be 80, 70, whatever that is, but the point is that by that same measure, has it gone up, gone down? And if it has gone down, why has it gone down, right? And I think those are sort of the metrics that we are trying to talk about. And I think to tag on to what Aswin was saying, and all this information, right, it does not exist in silo. I mean, this is not just some sort of a checklist sort of a thing that we are trying to do, right? So if we can feed all that information, and I go back to what Peter Kino talked about in his auditing and the future of audit, and it's a fantastic, I strongly recommend you that you go take a look at both those sessions, is that how do you use this for modeling and analytical purposes? How do you take risk and audit to the next level, right? And that's exactly the sort of I'm completely short on my slides. I think I said pretty much everything that I had to say on these slides, but I think the main point is that how do we make this accessible? How do we democratize this? Because there are some big companies that are certainly doing this. Whatever I'm saying is nothing new to, I'm guessing, to any of you. Many of you would have had your custom IT teams work on scripting, right? I mean, and many of you would have had your, you would have engaged your third-party contractors and consultants to work on these things. But the question is that how do we bring how do we democratize this so that most of us can use this? And most importantly, how do we democratize this so that you, as risk managers, as security managers, as auditors, you're able to sort of engage the second line of defense, right? How do we bring this transformation into the second line of defense so that we become your extended compliance engineering team, we become your extended audit engineering team, so that you're able to get this done faster, better, right? And that's sort of the perspective that we are trying to take. So I think shamelessly I'll take a sort of a vendor's pitch here, at least our view of what we are trying to do. So our objective, just to summarize what I said, is you can customize any framework. What I mean by framework here is the list of key risk indicators, right? And I'm using the word framework loosely, and this could be a completely technical set of key risk indicators that is published in, for example, CIS, Center for Internet Securities, which means that if you're deploying a particular application into Kubernetes, into your own farm, or if you're deploying into AWS or GCP, there are like 105 controls that you go evaluate. And the same thing with Docker, there are some things with GCP, so on and so forth, right? Or it could be your IT SOC set of controls. Termination control that we talked about. Or you can extend that into the sort of the new transformations that are happening within your organization, right? For example, how about if you are working with an organization that does engineering, how about the fact that they are churning changes at a much, much rapid clip? How do you make sure that somebody is not putting their access key, right, into their GitHub repo? What I mean by that is that now if I have access to the GitHub repo, you can protect all that you want. You can do all the vulnerability that you want on your systems. It doesn't matter. Right? So how do you catch up? How do you sort of keep ahead of what your engineering team is doing, what your IT teams are doing, and that's sort of, those are the things that we are talking about, right, when we say the frameworks. Or those could be completely business set of frameworks where you are talking about segregation of duties, right, or functional frameworks, sorry. And so the idea behind a framework is that it's essentially a bunch of key risk indicators. As you can see, I'm a technician, and my lingo is very technical. So we focus on the technical implementation aspects of it, but the point is that we see the world in very simple terms, right? And to us, a control, maybe I have a slide coming up, but we will be able to define any of these controls into this format of a framework. And the question is that how do you take that framework and dynamically attach that to an application scope? What we mean by that is that now I have a bunch of key risk indicators. How do I collect the performance of these of this? So for example, I say I want to go execute this against all my assets in EMEA. And I want to turn around and say, I want to execute this key risk indicators against my applications in HR space. Or I want to turn around and say, I want to do this for this particular line of business. These are nothing logical grouping of applications or systems that you're working on that you're determined based on business processes, right? And it could be record to report, it could be procure to pay, it could be any of those systems. But the point is that what is the target namespace in which I want to go evaluate my risk, right? And you can you are very flexible to go choose it and evaluate and attach to your target risk and to be able to execute it. And you will be able to integrate, deploy it, and you have the flexibility to deploy it anywhere. So you can deploy this if you are super anal about not sharing your data and you don't want to go anywhere. You can deploy this on-premise, you can deploy this completely on the cloud, and most importantly, you can deploy this on any continuous delivery framework. What I mean by that is, if your engineering team is doing a release every day and they are using a continuous delivery mechanism, what you want to do is that as policy managers, you have stated your positions. You have said these are the risks that we want to adhere to. As an engineer, I mean no offense, I really don't care, right? Because what I care is that I respect you and I want to make sure that I adhere to your policies, but I really don't care what that means for you. In many cases, I mean, as crude as it sounds, that's what it is. And what we are trying to do is to say that how do you integrate those risks from an engineer's point of view so that they can run this as part of their release pipeline and they can evaluate themselves. They can say whether we passed or failed, and if they can make some basic decisions, whether to promote it, if passes, or not promote it if they fail. But the most important thing is that you are not pulling this information anymore. You're not going to your IT teams, you're not going to your network teams, you're not going to your storage teams, you're not going to your VMware administrators, you're not going to your engineering teams and so on and so forth. You're pulling this information anymore, it gets pushed to you. As the nature of they do their operations, it continuously gets pushed to you and you're able to consume this. And that's basically, and my intent behind this is to share with you the perspective. I'm not trying to say that, this is the only perspective or this is but what I'm saying is that this is the way that we have seen it work with some large companies. This is the way we have felt very comfortable solving this problem. And if you want to take this into your own organizations, and even if you want to try and do something, I want you to think along these perspectives, right? Because the flexibility for you to decouple these elements, in my opinion, is fundamentally critical as a systems engineer. I think we covered some of all this, right? And this is the point of the virtuous cycle. I go back to the 3 circles that Peter Keno had drawn. And he talked about being continuous, being complete, which is a fantastic point, and being collaborative. And what he meant by, and we talked a lot about being continuous, right? And I think what he means by being complete is that because of the ability for us to be able to automate, you may not be able to automate every single process. You may not be able to take every single risk control and automate it. That's absolutely fine. But for those things that you're able to automate or semi-automate or partially automate, the point is that you don't have to necessarily look at this in a sampling data set. Your whole thing becomes your sample. And the point is that, so if you think about this from your own user experience, right? You go into MetricStream today, you have a bunch of risk controls that you have laid out, and now you sort of go in and you are able to evaluate your testing and you do your sampling, right? And you attach your evidences. Think about how, if you're able to get the entire sample set for that particular control, and you're able to sort of automatically, randomly pre-populate some of those samples and you're able to assess them, right? And that's what we are talking about. So how do you make it so simple for you to be able to evaluate? And I think he made some excellent points as he talked about, right? I mean, if you take 2 out of a 47 out of a 40 million transaction or a 40,000 transactions, right? I mean, what sort of guarantee does it provide to your, what sort of assurance can you provide? And these things you absolutely know, and I think we have the capability now to be able to do a lot of this in mass in a whole set. What does this mean? I think at a very fundamental bottom line, I think it is the time to, it is the speed, right? Have you guys heard of there is a very famous parable called boiled frog parable. Have you guys heard of anybody? Actually, it's a very famous, and maybe it's not so famous. Actually, if you have a boiling water, and you have a very high boiling water, you put a frog, what do you expect it to do? Frog. Yeah, you'll have to bear with my Indian accent, but it jumps out. However, and this is an experiment that was conducted and proved, if you have a lukewarm water, warm enough, and you put a frog in it, it enjoys it. You put it on a stove, you slowly increase this sort of heat. It continues to enjoy it. You keep increasing the heat. After a certain point in time, the frog is so much into it that it does not know how to come out, and it boils and it dies. And this is an experiment. And the very interesting thing, the reason I say this is that we are not frogs, but the reason I say this is that I think this sort of behavior is in a lot of us. I think sometimes the agility and the speed of a lot of these operations are very critical, because when we sort of try to, the delay aspects of it makes us a boiled frog many times, right? And what I'm trying to say is that I think a big part of what we are doing, if not for anything, is the ability for you to be able to compress your time in order to be able to do your controls, right? And I think that is one of the critical elements that we do across many of these. I mean, if you guys have any questions, I'll try and answer. Any questions so far? Am I doing good? Am I too fast? Okay. So I would use the word deep learning. I know Thomas would disagree with me. So the idea here is that if you sort of take it one layer down, right? If you think about deep learning, what deep learning is about, you have a bunch of data, you break it down into a bunch of features, and you create a cost for those features, which results in a weight, and that produces some probability of an output, right? That's what it is. So the first thing is, towards any machine learning, if you ask any data scientist, the first thing they will tell you, the biggest problem in deep learning, machine learning, AI, whatever you call it, is data, right? It's data. How do you get the data? How do you get enough data so that you can train it? How do you get enough quality data so that you can validate it, so that you can build those models? So the basic premise, the bedrock premise of your question is, how are we going to generate the data? So if you think about going back to what we are saying, is that the ability for you to be able to continuously control is not just a checkbox item. It is not about whether you passed or failed. It is about all the data that is generated in the commission of that process. And how are you able to tag that data? So if you are able to take that data, and if you're able to sort of analyze this, and you're able to do a feature breakdown, you will be able to build models on top of it. We actually don't build models at Continuum today, but we provide you the data in which you can build further models. Does it answer your question? No? Yes.
Some of them, they don't have a consistent sanitation for the data. That means you bring different qualities of data and different velocity of data. I want to understand how you and your models absorb this distinction, because essentially in machine learning, what you are doing is doing clusters for
Correct.
the data and compare these clusters.
Exactly.
Yeah, but essentially the previous steps to that is the sanitation.
Exactly. So we don't do, just to answer your question, so the way we sort of separate the data is that you have the data, you have the metadata, so that enriches in terms of all the operations that you're doing on the risk controls, right? And you're able to derive multiple features out of it. So you can derive a combination set of features, and that's where we stop. So eventually what you will need to do is to sort of use your data analyst to be able to sort of take that out and build your features and build those models. The point I'm trying to say is that when you use sort of the continuous MetricStream product, what you get is a rich set of data that you'll be able to use to further model. Maybe I'll take this. He just gave me saying that the time's up. Do we have any? Maybe I'll stop here. Any questions so far? Maybe I've talked too much. Any questions? Okay, so if no questions, do I have to hand it over to somebody else? Okay, if no questions, I'm right here, and you can please feel free to find me. And I've not done a demo or anything here, but I would be more than glad to walk you through sort of what we do and how we do it. And so thank you very much. Thanks.